She told me her ex is part of the family. Then he moved into our guest room. My girlfriend insisted her ex was part of the family, but I never expected him to become my roommate. Hey everyone, before we get into the video, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button if you want more stories just like this. Thanks for the support. My name is Tyler and I'm 28 years old when this story begins. I had been dating Rebecca for 8 months, and what started as a casual connection had blossomed into something I believed could be permanent. We met through mutual friends at a rooftop party in downtown Chicago, where I worked as a software developer and she ran a successful interior design business. From our first conversation, I was captivated by her intelligence, her quick wit, and the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed genuinely. She had this magnetic energy that drew people in, and I was no exception. The first few months were like something out of a romantic comedy. We'd spend weekends exploring neighborhoods neither of us had visited before, trying new restaurants, and taking long walks along Lake Michigan. She introduced me to her world of design, showing me how she saw beauty in ordinary spaces, while I taught her the basics of coding, watching her face light up when she created her first simple web page. We moved quickly, but it felt right, like we were both exactly where we needed to be. About 3 months into our relationship, Rebecca first mentioned David. We were having dinner at her apartment when her phone buzzed with a text message. She smiled warmly at the screen before typing a quick response. "Who was that?" I asked casually. "Oh, just David," she replied. "He wanted to know if I'd be interested in going to the art fair this weekend." I must have shown some confusion because she quickly added, "David's my ex-boyfriend. We dated for about 3 years, but we broke up amicably about a year before I met you. We're still really good friends." I nodded, trying to appear unfazed. I'd had amicable breakups before, though none where I remained close enough to attend art fairs with my ex. "He's actually part of the family now," Rebecca continued, her tone casual. "My parents absolutely adore him, and he comes to all our family gatherings. He even helped my dad build that deck in their backyard last summer." This was new territory for me. I'd never been in a relationship where an ex was so integrated into the family structure. But Rebecca seemed so comfortable with the arrangement, and I didn't want to appear insecure or controlling. Besides, I prided myself on being open-minded and understanding. "That's interesting," I managed. "So you guys are just friends now?" "Completely," she confirmed. "The romantic part of our relationship ended years ago, but the friendship remained. He's like a brother to me now." Over the next few weeks, I would hear David's name frequently. He was apparently a talented photographer who had taken all the professional headshots for Rebecca's business website. He was also the person she called when she needed help with anything technical, from fixing her printer to setting up her new smart TV. Sometimes, when we were out together, she'd show me photos on her phone of family events where David was present, always positioned naturally among her relatives. I started to notice the small things, how her face would light up differently when she talked about David compared to when she mentioned other friends, how she kept a framed photo of them together on her bookshelf, how she still wore the silver bracelet he'd given her for her birthday years ago. The first time I met David was at Rebecca's parents' house for a Sunday barbecue. He arrived with a homemade apple pie, Rebecca's mother's favorite dessert. He greeted her parents with hugs, kissed her grandmother's cheek, and ruffled her younger brother's hair like they were all his own family. When Rebecca introduced us, his handshake was firm, his smile genuine. "So you're the guy who's been making Becca happy," he said, using a nickname I hadn't heard anyone else use for her. "She talks about you all the time." "Only good things, I hope," I replied, trying to match his friendly demeanor. "Of course," he said, turning to Rebecca with a look that held more history than I was comfortable with. "She deserves the best." Throughout the afternoon, I watched as David seamlessly integrated into the family dynamic. He knew everyone's stories, inside jokes, and preferences. When Rebecca's father mentioned a problem with the family computer, David immediately offered to take a look. When her mother needed help moving patio furniture, he was there without being asked. I felt like an outsider in my own girlfriend's family gathering. Everyone was warm and welcoming, but they already had established roles and routines that included David as a central figure. I couldn't help but notice the way Rebecca's eyes would occasionally meet David's across the room, sharing silent conversations that excluded me. On the drive home, I tried to process my feelings. Was I being unreasonable, insecure, or were my concerns valid? "How was today?" Rebecca asked, reaching for my hand. "It was nice meeting your family," I said honestly. "And David, too." She squeezed my hand. "I'm so glad you all got along. It meant a lot to me." I hesitated before speaking again. "You two seem really close." "We are," she confirmed. "I told you, he's family." "But you dated for 3 years," I pointed out gently. "Isn't it weird to have him around so much?" "Not at all," she replied without missing a beat. "The romantic part is completely over. What we have now is deeper and more lasting." I wanted to ask more questions, to understand the nature of their relationship better, but I didn't want to seem accusatory. Instead, I nodded and tried to accept what she was telling me. If Rebecca was comfortable with this arrangement, who was I to question it? Love, I told myself, requires trust and acceptance of the other person's life, even the parts that don't fully make sense to you. What I didn't realize then was that this was just the beginning of a situation that would test the boundaries of my relationship in ways I never could have anticipated. The following months brought a series of small incidents that slowly chipped away at my comfort with Rebecca and David's friendship. Though I tried to be open-minded and trusting, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right about their relationship. One Tuesday evening, I arrived at Rebecca's apartment with takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant, planning to surprise her after what I knew had been a stressful day of client meetings. As I approached her door, I heard voices inside. Rebecca's familiar laugh mingled with a deeper male voice that I recognized as David's. I stood in the hallway for a moment, unsure whether to knock or just go in. We had an arrangement where either of us could let ourselves into the other's apartment, but I suddenly felt like an intruder. Taking a deep breath, I used my key and opened the door. They were sitting on the couch, closer than I would have expected for just friends. David had his arm draped casually along the back of the sofa behind Rebecca, and they were both looking at something on his laptop. They didn't immediately notice my presence, too engrossed in whatever they were doing. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Rebecca looked up, her face lighting up. "Tyler, what a nice surprise." She stood and came to give me a kiss, taking the bag of food from my hands. "You didn't tell me you were coming over." "I wanted to surprise you," I said, my eyes flicking between her and David, who had closed his laptop but remained seated on the couch. I didn't immediately notice my presence, too engrossed in whatever they were doing. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Rebecca looked up, her face lighting up. "Tyler, what a nice surprise." She stood and came to give me a kiss, taking the bag of food from my hands. "You didn't tell me you were coming over." "I wanted to surprise you," I said, my eyes flicking between her and David, who had closed his laptop but remained seated on the couch. "Oh, David just stopped by to help me with some design software," she explained, heading to the kitchen. "He's a lifesaver with technical stuff." "No problem at all," David said, finally standing. "Happy to help. Actually, I should going anyway. I have an early morning tomorrow." As he gathered his things, I noticed the casual intimacy between them. The way she touched his arm as she passed him in the kitchen. The way he knew exactly where to find her recycling bin for his empty water bottle. The comfortable silence that fell between them as he prepared to leave. "Great meeting you again, Tyler," David said at the door. "We should all hang out properly sometime." "Sure," I replied, though the thought didn't particularly appeal to me. After he left, I helped Rebecca set up the food on her small dining table. "David was just helping me choose a new design software," she explained, as if sensing my unspoken question. "He knows so much about that stuff." "It's nice that he helps you out," I said, trying to sound supportive. "He's always been there for me," she replied. "Even when we were dating and going through tough times, he was my rock." This comment lingered in my mind long after we finished dinner and I returned to my apartment. The phrase, "even when we were dating," struck me as odd. It suggested that David had been supporting Rebecca during their relationship, which didn't align with the narrative of a typical romantic partnership. A few weeks later, Rebecca invited me to join her and some friends for a weekend trip to a cabin in Wisconsin. When I arrived at her apartment on Friday morning to leave, I was surprised to find David already there, loading bags into her car. "David's coming with us," Rebecca announced cheerfully. "He was able to get the weekend off at the last minute." I hadn't been aware that David was part of this trip, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. I had been looking forward to a weekend with Rebecca and her friends, getting to know them better and establishing my place in her social circle. The 2-hour drive to the cabin was uncomfortable for me. Rebecca and David sat in the front seats, sharing memories of previous trips they had taken together, while I sat alone in the back, feeling like a third wheel. They had an entire shared history that I wasn't part of, complete with inside jokes and references to people and events I knew nothing about. At the cabin, the dynamics became even more apparent. David naturally took charge of activities, suggesting hikes, building the fire, and organizing meals. Everyone deferred to his knowledge of the area and his experience with these trips. I found myself constantly trying to find ways to contribute or be useful, but always feeling like I was stepping on David's territory. One evening, as we all sat around the fire, someone suggested telling embarrassing stories. David immediately launched into a tale about a vacation he and Rebecca had taken to Mexico years ago, describing in detail how she had gotten food poisoning and he had taken care of her for days. "She was so miserable," he recounted, a fond smile on his face. "But I didn't mind at all. Taking care of her felt natural." Rebecca laughed along with everyone else, but I noticed her hand briefly touch David's arm as he spoke, a gesture of familiarity and affection that made my stomach clench. That night, as Rebecca and I lay in the small bedroom we were sharing, I finally voiced some of my discomfort. "You and David seem very close," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "We are," she replied, her voice soft in the darkness. "I told you, he's like family. It's just, sometimes it feels like I'm intruding on something between you two," I admitted. Rebecca turned to face me, her expression concerned. "That's not how it is at all. David and I have a deep friendship that's built on years of knowing each other, but it's completely platonic. You're my partner, my boyfriend. That's different." "I know," I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced. "It's just hard sometimes, seeing how close you are." "Is this about the stories from when we were dating?" she asked. "Because that was years ago. We've both moved on." "It's not just the stories," I tried to explain. "It's the way you interact, the comfort between you, the shared history. Sometimes I feel like I'll never be as close to you as he is." Rebecca was quiet for a moment before responding. "What David and I have is different from what you and I have. What we have is romantic and still growing. What I have with David is established and settled. They can coexist." I wanted to believe her, to trust that their relationship was as platonic as she claimed, but as I drifted off to sleep that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was competing with a ghost that was very much alive and present in our relationship. The return trip on Sunday was even more uncomfortable than the drive there. David and Rebecca sat in the front again, this time holding hands as David drove. When I questioned this later, Rebecca explained that David gets anxious on highways, and holding his hand helps him stay calm. It seemed like a reasonable explanation, but it didn't sit right with me. By the time we got back to the city, I was feeling increasingly insecure about my place in Rebecca's life. I had tried to be understanding and accepting of her friendship with David, but the more time I spent with them together, the more I felt like an outsider in their world. The summer months brought a new level of intensity to Rebecca and David's friendship, and with it, a new level of discomfort for me. As the weather warmed, their social activities increased, and I found myself constantly navigating situations where David was present. One Saturday in June, Rebecca called me early in the morning with exciting news. Her design business had been featured in a local lifestyle magazine, and she wanted to celebrate. We made plans to have dinner at her place that evening, and I offered to pick up her favorite bottle of wine and dessert. When I arrived at her apartment around 7 p.m., I was surprised to find the door slightly ajar. I let myself in, calling out to announce my presence, but there was no response. As I walked further into the apartment, I heard voices coming from her bedroom, Rebecca's and David's. I stood in the hallway for a moment, feeling a wave of unease wash over me. It was one thing for them to spend time together in public spaces or with family around, but the intimacy of her bedroom felt like crossing a boundary. Before I could decide what to do, Rebecca emerged from the bedroom, her face flushed with excitement. She was wearing a silk robe I hadn't seen before, and her hair was slightly disheveled. "Tyler, you're here!" she exclaimed, coming to give me a hug. "I was just showing David the magazine article. He wanted to see it right away." David followed her out of the bedroom, adjusting his shirt cuffs. He looked surprised to see me, though he quickly recovered and offered a friendly greeting. "Hey man, good to see you," he said. "Becca told me the great news about the magazine feature. I had to come over and congratulate her in person." "Thanks," I replied, my eyes briefly flicking to Rebecca's partially closed bedroom door. "I didn't realize you'd be here." "I hope it's okay," David said, his tone sincere. "I can head out if you guys want to celebrate alone." "No, don't be silly," Rebecca interjected before I could respond. "The more the merrier. Tyler, why don't you open that wine while I finish getting ready?" As David moved to the living room, I pulled Rebecca aside. "I thought this was supposed to be a celebration for us," I said, keeping my voice low. "It is," she replied, looking confused. "But David is my friend too. Why wouldn't I want to share my good news with him?" "Because we're in a relationship," I explained, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Sometimes I want to celebrate special moments with just you." "I understand that," she said, her expression softening. "But David has been supporting my business from the beginning. He helped me build my website, he takes all my professional photos, he gives me feedback on my designs. He's been instrumental in my success." "I get that," I said, though I didn't entirely understand why that necessitated his presence in her bedroom while she was wearing a robe. "But it would be nice to have some moments that are just ours." Rebecca sighed, a hint of impatience in her expression. "Tyler, I love you, and I love spending time with you. But David is a huge part of my life, and that's not going to change. I need you to accept that." Before I could respond, she disappeared into her bedroom to finish getting dressed, leaving me alone with David in the living room. We made awkward small conversation for a few minutes until Rebecca emerged, now dressed in a beautiful navy blue dress that highlighted her figure. The evening was tense for me, though Rebecca and David seemed completely at ease. They reminisced about the early days of her business, laughing at memories I wasn't part of. David had brought a gift, a vintage brass lamp that he thought would look perfect in her office. When she unwrapped it, her eyes lit up with genuine delight. "It's perfect," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him in a hug that lasted a moment too long for my comfort. "How did you know I've been looking for something exactly like this?" "I pay attention," he replied, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes when he glanced at me. Throughout dinner, I felt like an outsider in my own celebration. The conversation naturally flowed between Rebecca and David, touching on people and events I knew nothing about. I tried to participate, but I constantly felt like I was interrupting something private between them. By the time David left around 10 p.m., I was feeling more insecure than ever about my place in Rebecca's life. "He seems really thoughtful," I said, trying to sound casual as we cleaned up the dinner dishes. "He is," Rebecca agreed. "He's always been that way. Even when we were dating, he was the most considerate person I knew." This comment caught me off guard. "You've never really talked much about your relationship with him," I said, seizing the opportunity. "What was it like?" Rebecca paused, considering her response. "It was intense," she finally said. "We met in college and were together through graduation and beyond. We built our careers together, supported each other through tough times. He was my first real love." "So why did you break up?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "We wanted different things," she replied vaguely. "He wanted to travel the world as a photographer, and I wanted to establish my business here. It was a mutual decision." Her explanation seemed rehearsed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. But I didn't press further, not wanting to seem insecure or jealous. The following month, Rebecca's sister announced her engagement, and we were invited to the engagement party. As we were getting ready to leave, Rebecca received a text message. "It's from David," she said, looking at her phone. "He wants to know if we can give him a ride to the party." I must have shown my surprise, because she quickly added, "He's always invited to family events. He's been close with my sister for years." This was news to me. Though I had met Rebecca's parents and knew David was part of their family gatherings, I didn't realize he was included in more intimate family events like engagement parties. The ride to the party was uncomfortable for me. David sat in the front passenger seat, naturally taking control of the music and navigation, while I sat alone in the back. They reminisced about previous family events they had attended together, laughing at memories I wasn't part of. At the party, David was in his element, greeting family members with hugs, helping with the setup, and seamlessly integrating into the family dynamic. I felt awkward and out of place, constantly trying to find ways to fit in, but always feeling like I was intruding on David's territory. The most uncomfortable moment came when Rebecca's sister made her toast. She thanked everyone for coming, then specifically mentioned David. "And of course, thank you to David for always being there for our family," she said, raising her glass in his direction. "We're so lucky to have you as part of our family, no matter what." The "no matter what" hung in the air, a reference to something I didn't understand, but that everyone else seemed to. David nodded in acknowledgement, his eyes briefly meeting Rebecca's across the room. On the drive home, I couldn't contain my curiosity anymore. "What did your sister mean by 'no matter what'?" I asked. Rebecca was quiet for a moment before responding. "David went through a really tough time a few years ago," she explained. "He lost his job, his apartment, and was dealing with some health issues. My family really stepped up to help him through it." "That's nice of them," I said, though there seemed to be more to the story. "But why would they need to specify 'no matter what'?" "Because some people questioned how involved my family was in helping him," she replied, her tone defensive. "They thought it was inappropriate given that we were exes." "And what do you think?" I asked. "I think family is family," she said firmly. "David needed help, and we were there for him. That's what people who care about each other do." I nodded, though her explanation didn't fully satisfy my curiosity. There was still something about their relationship that didn't add up, some piece of the puzzle I was missing. As we pulled up to Rebecca's apartment building, David turned to face us in the back seat. "Hey, I have something to tell you guys," he said, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about this for a while, and I've decided to move back to the city." "That's great news," Rebecca exclaimed. "Where are you thinking of living?" "Well, that's the thing," he continued, his eyes briefly meeting Rebecca's before looking at me. "I was wondering if I might be able to stay with you guys for a little while, just until I find a place of my own." Before I could process this request, Rebecca was already responding. "Of course," she said enthusiastically. "You can stay in my guest room. We'd love to have you." I sat in the back seat, stunned into silence. My girlfriend had just invited her ex-boyfriend to move in with her, without even consulting me first. As I watched David and Rebecca exchange relieved smiles in the front seat, I couldn't help but feel that I had just lost control of my own relationship. The following weeks were a blur of activity as David prepared to move into Rebecca's guest room. Though I had serious reservations about the arrangement, I found myself going along with it, not wanting to create conflict or appear controlling. David's arrival was treated more like a homecoming than a new roommate moving in. Rebecca's parents came over to help, bringing a housewarming casserole and some of David's belongings that had been stored in their attic. Her sister and brother-in-law stopped by with a six-pack of David's favorite craft beer. Even her grandmother made an appearance, bringing a homemade apple pie, the same one David had brought to the first family barbecue I had attended. As I watched this scene unfold, I felt increasingly like an outsider in my own girlfriend's life. Everyone was treating David's move as a natural, expected development, while I stood on the periphery, trying to find a way to fit in. The first few days of David's residency were awkward for me, though Rebecca and he seemed completely at ease. He knew his way around her apartment better than I did after months of dating. He knew which cabinet held the coffee mugs, where the extra towels were stored, and how to work the complicated remote control for her entertainment system. What bothered me most was how naturally he integrated into our daily routines. He would join Rebecca for her morning runs, something I had never been invited to do. He took over grocery shopping, coming back with all of Rebecca's favorite items, plus a few I didn't know she liked. He even started cooking dinner most nights, preparing meals he knew she loved from their years together. One evening, about a week after David moved in, I arrived at Rebecca's apartment to find them in the living room, looking through old photo albums. "Look at this one," Rebecca said, pointing to a photo of the two of them on a beach somewhere tropical. "This was in Costa Rica, right after we graduated from college." David laughed. "You got so sunburned that day, I had to run all over town looking for aloe vera." "I remember," Rebecca said, her voice soft with nostalgia. "You took such good care of me." I stood in the doorway, watching them share this memory, feeling like an intruder in their private moment. When they noticed me, Rebecca's face lit up. "Tyler, come look at these old photos," she said, patting the couch beside her. "David was just showing me pictures from our college days." I reluctantly joined them on the couch, trying to show interest in the photos that chronicled a history I wasn't part of. As they flipped through the pages, I noticed a pattern. The photos showed a couple deeply in love, with an easy intimacy that seemed to contradict Rebecca's claims that their romantic relationship had ended years ago. "What happened after this trip?" I asked, pointing to a particularly intimate photo of them watching a sunset on the beach. Rebecca and David exchanged a look before she responded. "We came back and started looking for jobs. That's when things got difficult." "Because you wanted different things?" I asked, referencing her earlier explanation. "Partially," she said vaguely. "There were other factors too." Before I could press for more details, David changed the subject, pointing to another photo and launching into a story about a hiking trip they had taken. I let it go, but the unanswered question lingered in my mind. As the weeks passed, I found myself becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the living arrangement. David's presence was constant and pervasive. He had a key to the apartment, came and went as he pleased, and seemed to have no concept of boundaries when it came to Rebecca's personal space. One Saturday morning, I let myself into Rebecca's apartment, planning to surprise her with coffee and pastries from her favorite bakery. As I walked toward the kitchen, I heard voices coming from her bedroom, Rebecca's and David's. The door was slightly ajar, and I couldn't help but overhear their conversation. "I just don't know if I can do this," Rebecca was saying, her voice strained. "You have to," David replied, gently. "We agreed this was for the best." "But what about Tyler?" she asked. "He deserves to know the truth." "He deserves to be happy," David countered. "And if telling him the truth would ruin that, then maybe it's better he doesn't know." I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding. What were they talking about? What truth was Rebecca keeping from me? Before I could hear more, I accidentally knocked against a small table in the hallway, causing a vase to wobble precariously. "Who's there?" Rebecca called out. I quickly composed myself and walked toward the bedroom door. "It's just me," I said, trying to sound casual. "I brought breakfast." Rebecca emerged from the bedroom, her face flushed. David followed a moment later, avoiding eye contact with me. "Tyler, what a nice surprise," Rebecca said, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "We were just having a private conversation." "I gathered," I replied, my eyes flicking between them. "Everything okay?" "Of course," David said quickly, "just discussing some family matters." Rebecca nodded in agreement, though I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Nothing for you to worry about." As I set up the coffee and pastries in the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were hiding something important from me. Their conversation had been cryptic but suggestive, hinting at secrets and agreements I knew nothing about. The following week, I arrived at Rebecca's apartment to find David in the living room, packing a suitcase. "Going somewhere?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Just a weekend trip," he replied, "helping my sister move into her new apartment." "That's nice of you," I said, though I couldn't help but feel relieved at the prospect of having the apartment to ourselves for a couple of days. Rebecca came out of her bedroom, looking upset. "I wish you didn't have to go," she said to David. "I'll be back Sunday evening," he replied, giving her a hug that lasted a moment too long. "Call me if you need anything." After he left, I turned to Rebecca. "You seem sad about him leaving." "I just worry when he travels," she explained. "He has some health issues, and I like to know he's okay." "What kind of health issues?" I asked, though I suspected she wouldn't give me a straight answer. "Just some chronic conditions," she replied vaguely. "Nothing serious, but they require monitoring." I nodded, though her explanation did little to satisfy my curiosity. There seemed to be so much about David's life that was kept private, even from me. That evening, as we were having dinner, Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text message. She smiled as she read it, then quickly typed a response. "Who was that?" I asked casually. "Just David," she replied, checking in to let me know he arrived safely. "You two seem really close," I observed, trying to keep my tone neutral. "We are," she confirmed. "He's been there for me through some really tough times, and I try to be there for him too." "What kind of tough times?" I asked, sensing an opportunity to learn more about their relationship. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, considering her response. "A few years ago, I went through something really difficult," she finally said. "I don't really like to talk about it, but David was the only person who truly understood what I was going through." "What happened?" I asked gently. She shook her head. "It's in the past now, but it brought us closer in a way that's hard to explain. We have a bond that goes beyond friendship or romance." I wanted to press for more details, to understand the nature of their bond better, but I could see that this was a sensitive topic for her. Instead, I reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm glad you had someone to support you," I said sincerely. "Thank you," she replied, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "That means a lot to me." As we finished dinner and cleaned up together, I couldn't help but feel that there was still so much about Rebecca's past and her relationship with David that I didn't understand. The more time I spent with them, the more I realized that their connection went deeper than I had initially thought, a realization that both fascinated and frightened me. The following months brought a series of incidents that gradually eroded my trust in Rebecca and my comfort with her relationship with David. Though I tried to be understanding and supportive of their bond, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with the situation. One Friday evening in October, I arrived at Rebecca's apartment to find her and David in the living room, engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation. They stopped talking as soon as I entered, exchanging a look that suggested I had interrupted something private. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual as I set my bag on the counter. "What's up?" "Nothing," Rebecca replied quickly, though her tense expression suggested otherwise. "Just discussing some logistics." "About what?" I asked, though I suspected I wouldn't get a straight answer. David stood up. "Actually, I was just leaving," he said, grabbing his jacket from the back of a chair. "I'll see you later, Becca." After he left, I turned to Rebecca. "What was that about?" "Nothing important," she replied, avoiding eye contact as she straightened some magazines on the coffee table. "Just some family stuff." "Family stuff that involves David?" I asked, unable to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Rebecca sighed, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Tyler, we've been over this. David is part of my family. Of course he's involved in family matters." "But what family matters require secret conversations that stop when I walk in?" I pressed. She looked at me then, her expression a mixture of frustration and something else, guilt, perhaps. "It's complicated," she said finally. "There are things you don't understand about my family and David's place in it." "Then help me understand," I said, my voice softening. "I want to be part of your life, Rebecca, but I feel like there's this whole aspect of it that's closed off to me." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, considering her response. "Some things are private," she finally said, "not just from you." "But from everyone. They're not my secrets to share." I nodded, though her explanation did little to satisfy my curiosity. The more time I spent with Rebecca and David, the more I realized that there were layers to their relationship that I couldn't see or understand. The following week, I came home from work early to find David in the kitchen, cooking dinner. The apartment was filled with the aroma of garlic and tomatoes, and I could hear Rebecca's laughter coming from her bedroom. "Hey," I said, setting my keys on the counter. "Smells good in here." "Tyler, you're home early," David said, turning from the stove with a smile. "I'm making Rebecca's favorite pasta. She's had a stressful day at work." "That's thoughtful of you," I replied, though I couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. I had been planning to surprise Rebecca with dinner after her stressful day, but David had beaten me to it. Rebecca emerged from her bedroom then, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Tyler, what a nice surprise!" "I came home early to spend some time with you," I said, moving to give her a kiss. "I heard you had a stressful day." "I did," she confirmed, her eyes briefly flicking to David before returning to me. "But David's making my favorite comfort food, so that helps." As we sat down to dinner, I couldn't help but notice the easy intimacy between Rebecca and David. They moved around each other in the small kitchen space with a familiarity that comes from years of shared experiences. He knew exactly how she liked her pasta cooked, which wine she preferred with this particular dish, and that she always saved the best bite for last. "You guys seem really comfortable together," I observed, trying to sound casual rather than accusatory. "We've known each other for a long time," Rebecca replied, though I noticed she exchanged a quick look with David as she spoke. "Almost 10 years now," David added. "We've been through a lot together in that time." "What kind of things?" I asked, sensing an opportunity to learn more about their shared history. David and Rebecca exchanged another look before she responded. "Just life stuff," she said vaguely. "Good times, bad times, everything in between." I nodded, though her explanation did little to satisfy my curiosity. There seemed to be so much about their relationship that was kept private, even from me. The following weekend, Rebecca and I had planned to attend a wedding together. As we were getting ready, she received a phone call that visibly upset her. "What's wrong?" I asked, concerned by her pale complexion. "It's David," she said, her voice shaking. "He's in the hospital." "What happened?" I asked, already reaching for my keys. "He had some kind of medical episode," she explained, grabbing her purse. "I need to go to him." "Of course," I said, though I couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. "Should I come with you?" Rebecca hesitated for a moment before responding. "Actually, would you mind if I went alone? His family is meeting me there, and it might be overwhelming with too many people." I nodded, though I couldn't help but feel excluded. "Okay, keep me updated?" "I will," she promised, giving me a quick kiss before rushing out the door. I spent the next few hours anxiously waiting for news, my mind racing with possibilities. Finally, around 10 p.m., Rebecca called to let me know that David was stable and would be staying overnight for observation. "What happened?" I asked. "They're not entirely sure yet," she replied, her voice weary. "Some kind of seizure or fainting spell. They're running tests." "Is there anything I can do?" I asked. "Just be patient with me," she said. "This is bringing up some difficult memories." "What kind of memories?" I asked. There was a pause on the other end of the line before she responded. "David had a serious health crisis a few years ago," she finally said. "It was traumatic. I was with him through the whole thing, and it brought us closer in a way that's hard to explain." "What kind of health crisis?" I asked, though I suspected she wouldn't give me a straight answer. "It's complicated," she replied, echoing her response to so many of my questions about their relationship. "I'll tell you about it sometime, but not right now." I nodded, though she couldn't see me through the phone. "Okay, just let me know if you need anything." "I will," she promised. "I should probably stay here tonight, just in case." I understood, though I couldn't help but feel disappointed that our plans had been disrupted, and that she was choosing to stay at the hospital with David rather than come home to me. The following morning, Rebecca called to let me know that David was being released and that she would be bringing him home to rest. "Is he going to be okay?" I asked. "The doctors think it was just an isolated incident," she replied. "They want him to take it easy for a few days, but they don't think it's anything serious." "That's good news," I said, though I couldn't help but feel that there was more to the story. "Do you need help with anything?" "Actually, would you mind if we postponed our plans for today?" she asked. "I want to make sure David is comfortable and has everything he needs." I agreed, though I couldn't shake the feeling that I was once again being pushed to the sidelines in favor of David. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help wonder if there would ever be a time when Rebecca and I could have a relationship that wasn't constantly influenced by her connection to her ex. That evening, I decided to stop by Rebecca's apartment to check on them. When I arrived, I found David asleep on the couch with Rebecca watching over him, a worried expression on her face. "How is he?" I asked softly. "Resting," she replied, gesturing for me to join her in the kitchen. "The doctors think it was just a fainting spell brought on by dehydration and exhaustion, but they want him to take it easy for a few days." "That's scary," I said, genuinely concerned. "How are you doing?" "I'm okay," she replied, though her tense expression suggested otherwise. "It just brought back some difficult memories from the last time he was seriously ill." "What happened last time?" I asked gently. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, considering her response. "It was about 3 years ago, a few months before we broke up," she finally said. "David was diagnosed with a rare neurological condition that caused seizures and other symptoms." "That sounds serious," I said, my concern growing. "It was," she confirmed. "He was in and out of the hospital for months, and there was a time when we weren't sure if he would recover. I was with him through the whole thing: doctor's appointments, hospital stays, recovery." "That must have been incredibly difficult," I said, trying to imagine what she had gone through. "It was," she agreed, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But it also brought us closer in a way that's hard to explain. When you go through something like that with someone, it creates a bond that goes beyond friendship or romance." I nodded, beginning to understand the depth of their connection. "Is that why you broke up, because of his illness?" "Partially," she replied vaguely. "There were other factors too." Before I could press for more details, David stirred on the couch, calling out for Rebecca. She rushed to his side, her attention immediately focused on his needs. As I watched her care for him, I couldn't help but feel like an outsider in their private world. They had a shared history of trauma and recovery that I couldn't be part of, a bond forged in crisis that excluded everyone else. For the first time, I began to wonder if their relationship was truly platonic, or if there was something more between them that Rebecca wasn't telling me. The following weeks brought a new level of tension to my relationship with Rebecca. Though I tried to be understanding and supportive of her concern for David's health, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling me about their relationship. One evening, as we were having dinner at my apartment, Rebecca seemed particularly distracted. She kept checking her phone, her brow furrowed with concern. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "What? Oh, yes," she replied, though her attention was clearly elsewhere. "Just checking in with David. He's had a rough day." I nodded, trying to suppress my frustration. It seemed like every conversation eventually circled back to David. "Is his health getting worse?" I asked, trying to show genuine concern. "No, not really," she replied vaguely. "Just some side effects from his medication. It's to be expected." We ate in silence for a few minutes, the unspoken tension between us growing thicker with each passing moment. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Rebecca, we need to talk," I said, setting my fork down. She looked up, her expression wary. "About what?" "About us? About David? About this situation," I said, gesturing vaguely between us. "I feel like I'm living in someone else's relationship, and I don't know how much more of it I can take." Rebecca sighed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I know this has been difficult for you, Tyler, and I appreciate how patient you've been." "I've tried to be," I said, my voice rising with emotion, "but I'm at my limit. I feel like I'm constantly competing with a ghost, except the ghost isn't dead. He's living in your guest room, cooking your dinner, and taking up all your emotional energy." "It's not like that," she protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "Then what is it like?" I asked, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're still in a relationship with your ex, and I'm just the guy who gets to watch from the sidelines. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on her plate. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with a sadness that went deeper than I had ever seen before. "There's something I need to tell you," she said softly. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for her to continue. "David and I didn't break up because we wanted different things," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Then why did you break up?" I asked, though I was almost afraid to hear the answer. "Because of his illness," she said finally. "The neurological condition I told you about." "I don't understand," I said, confused. "You said you were there for him through his illness." Why would that cause you to break up? Because it wasn't just his illness, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. It was my diagnosis too. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process what she was saying. Your diagnosis? You have the same condition? She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. It's genetic, rare, but it runs in families. David and I found out around the same time. We were both facing a future of uncertainty, of progressive neurological decline, of potentially losing everything we had worked for. I was speechless, the weight of her revelation settling over me like a heavy blanket. All the pieces suddenly clicked into place. The secret conversations, the shared history of trauma, the bond that went beyond friendship or romance, the way her family had embraced David as one of their own. We broke up because we didn't want to burden each other, she continued, her voice cracking with emotion. We thought it would be easier to face this separately, to find partners who didn't have the same ticking time bomb in their DNA. We thought we were being noble, selfless. But you couldn't stay away from each other, I said. It wasn't a question. She shook her head. We tried. We both dated other people, but no one understood what we were going through. No one else could look at us and see the fear behind our eyes, the knowledge of what might be coming. So we found our way back to each other, not as lovers, but as partners in survival. I sat in stunned silence, the full scope of their relationship finally becoming clear. They weren't exes who had remained friends. They were two people facing a shared tragedy, bound together by something far more powerful than romance. When David moved back to the city, he wasn't just looking for a place to stay, she said, her voice barely audible. His condition had worsened, and he needed someone to help him. I couldn't turn him away, Tyler. I just couldn't. I understand, I said, though I wasn't sure if I did. My mind was reeling from the revelation, trying to reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the person sitting in front of me, carrying this immense burden. Do you? She asked, her eyes searching mine. Can you understand why I couldn't tell you? Why I kept this part of my life hidden? I thought about the past months, the feelings of insecurity and jealousy, the sense that I was an outsider in their world. It all made sense now, but it didn't make the pain go away. I understand why you did it, I said slowly. But I don't know if I can be part of it, Rebecca. I don't know if I can be in a relationship where I'm always going to be second to this connection you have with David. Tears streamed down her cheeks now, her expression a mixture of heartbreak and resignation. I knew you would say that, she said softly. And I don't blame you. It's a lot to ask of someone. We sat in silence for a long time, the remains of our dinner growing cold between us. The future we had been building together suddenly felt fragile, uncertain, like a house of cards ready to collapse at the slightest breeze. What happens now? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Rebecca wiped away her tears, her expression hardening with resolve. David and I will face this together, like we always have. As for you and me, I understand if you need to walk away, Tyler. I won't hold it against you. As I looked at the woman I loved, seeing her for the first time as she truly was, flawed, frightened, but incredibly brave, I knew that walking away wouldn't be easy. But staying would mean accepting a role I had never signed up for, a life that would always be shadowed by her past and her connection to David. In that moment, I realized that love wasn't just about accepting the other person's life. It was about deciding whether you could live with the parts they kept hidden in the shadows. And as I sat there, weighing my options, I knew that this was one decision that would define the rest of my life.